I've been driving a taxi in Chicago for 9 years. 9 years of night shifts, 9 years of drunk passengers and lost tourists, and people trying to get home after their lives fell apart. 9 years of watching the city through my windshield while strangers sit in my back seat and tell me things they wouldn't tell their therapists. It's decent money, steady work, the kind of job where you learn to read people in the first 30 seconds, where you know who's going to tip and who's going to cause problems, where you understand that most people just want to get from point A to point B without conversation. My dispatcher gave me the rules on my first night. Standard protocols mostly. Check the meter. Lock your doors between fares. Don't take shortcuts through bad neighborhoods. Keep cash in your front pocket, never in the glove box. But at the end of my orientation, the night shift supervisor, a man named Marcus Webb, who'd been driving taxis since 1987, handed me a piece of paper, folded, worn, covered in handwriting that looked like it had been copied and recopied dozens of times. Rules for night shift taxi drivers, Chicago metro area. Rule 1, never pick up passengers at the corner of State and Division after 2 a.m. Rule 2, if someone asks you to drive to an address that doesn't exist, decline the fare and report it to dispatch. Rule 3, do not accept payment in coins only, no exceptions. Rule 4, if your passenger asks you to turn off the meter, refuse politely and end the fare. Rule 5, never let passengers sit in the front seat after midnight. And then I saw Rule 6, written in red ink that looked darker than the rest, like it had been written with something thicker than ink, like it had been written with emphasis, with warning, with blood. Rule 6, if a passenger gets in your taxi and says nothing, do not speak to them. Do not ask for their destination. Do not make small talk. Do not acknowledge them beyond driving. Wait for them to speak first. If they remain silent for the entire ride, drive wherever they direct you with gestures only. Under no circumstances are you to break their silence. If you speak to a silent passenger, you become responsible for what happens next. I looked at Marcus. What does that mean? Responsible for what happens next? His face was grave. Every taxi driver in Chicago knows about the silent passengers. They've been getting into cabs since before we had cars, since horse-drawn carriages, since people started paying for transport through city streets. They get in, they sit in the back, they say nothing. And if you're smart, if you follow the rules, if you respect their silence, they get out at their destination and you never see them again. What happens if you speak to them? Marcus pulled out a file. Inside were police reports, missing person reports, all taxi drivers, all from Chicago, all from the night shift, 17 names over the past 40 years. All of them had one thing in common. They picked up a silent passenger. They spoke to them. Despite the silence, they broke Rule 6 and they were never seen again. Their taxis were found empty, engines running, meters still on. Sometimes the back door was open, sometimes it was closed, but the drivers were gone. No blood, no evidence of struggle, no witnesses, no bodies ever recovered, just empty taxis and missing drivers and families who never got answers. What are they? The silent passengers? Nobody knows. Some drivers think they're ghosts. Some think they're demons. Some think they're something else entirely. Something that exists in the space between origin and destination. Something that uses taxis because taxis are liminal spaces, places of transition, neither here nor there, always moving, always in between. And if you respect their silence, if you let them complete their journey without interference, they leave you alone. But if you speak, if you acknowledge them, if you try to interact, you become part of their journey. You become what they're transporting. You become the passenger. I followed Rule 6 for 9 years, picked up hundreds of passengers, drove thousands of miles through Chicago streets, had plenty of quiet fares, people who were tired, people who were angry, people who didn't want to talk. But those weren't silent passengers. Those people would at least give me an address, would at least say thank you when they got out, would at least acknowledge my existence. The silent passengers were different. I could feel them when they got in my taxi, could feel the temperature drop, could feel the air get heavy, could feel something wrong in a way I couldn't explain. And I followed the rules. I stayed quiet. I waited for gestures. I drove where they pointed, and they always got out, always left, always disappeared into the Chicago night, and I always went home until last night. The fare request came through at 1:37 a.m. Pick up at the corner of Michigan and Monroe. I drove to the location, saw a figure standing on the curb wearing dark clothes, face hidden by shadow. I pulled up, unlocked the back door. The figure got in, and I knew immediately this was a silent passenger. The temperature in my taxi dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath became visible. The air felt thick, heavy, like breathing through water, and I couldn't see them in my rearview mirror. The back seat looked empty, but I felt the weight, felt the presence, felt something sitting behind me that shouldn't exist in the physical world. I waited, hands on the steering wheel, eyes forward, following Rule 6, waiting for a gesture, waiting for direction. The meter was off. Silent passengers never trigger the meter, never show up on trip logs, never exist in any official capacity. They just are. A hand appeared in my peripheral vision, pointing north on Michigan Avenue. I drove. The hand pointed again, east on Superior. I turned. The hand kept pointing, directing me through empty Chicago streets, through neighborhoods I knew, through areas I'd driven 1,000 times. But everything looked wrong. The buildings seemed taller. The streets seemed narrower. The streetlights seemed dimmer, like I was driving through a version of Chicago that was almost right, but fundamentally different. We drove for what felt like hours. Maybe it was hours. Time felt wrong, elastic. My dashboard clock showed 1:45, then 1:39, then 2:12, then 1:53. Numbers that didn't make sense. Time moving in circles instead of forward. And then I made the mistake, the worst mistake of my life. I spoke. Where are we going? 3 words, just 3 simple words. But the moment they left my mouth, everything changed. The hand pointing directions froze. The temperature dropped even further. Frost formed on my windows, on my windshield, on my steering wheel. And I heard something, a sound like breathing, but wrong. Like someone inhaling but reversed, like the world was being pulled into a vacuum. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for the first time, I saw the passenger, really saw them. They weren't empty, they weren't invisible, they were there, and they were looking at me, and their eyes were black, completely black, no whites, no irises, just darkness that went down forever. And their mouth was open, too open, jaw unhinged like a snake, and inside that mouth was more darkness, deeper darkness, darkness that moved, that writhed, that reached, and then they spoke, not with words, not with sound, but I heard them anyway, heard them inside my head, inside my thoughts, inside my soul. You spoke, you broke the silence, you acknowledged me. Now you're part of the journey. Now you're what I'm transporting. Now you're the passenger. My taxi stopped, engine died, lights went out, and I was sitting in complete darkness on a Chicago street that looked familiar but felt wrong. Buildings I recognized but couldn't name, intersections I'd driven through but couldn't place, a version of my city that existed sideways to reality. I tried to open my door, locked, not mechanically locked, just impossible to open, like the door wasn't a door anymore, like it was just part of the wall, part of the vehicle, part of the trap. The thing in my backseat moved. I heard fabric shifting, heard weight redistributing, heard something that sounded like joints cracking, but too many joints, too many bones, too many pieces moving in too many directions. And then I felt hands on my shoulders, cold hands, hands with too many fingers, hands that gripped with pressure that should break bones but didn't, just held, just touched, just marked. You've been driving for 9 years. You've seen 23 of us, 23 silent passengers, 23 journeys you facilitated without interference. But tonight, you spoke. Tonight, you asked a question. Tonight, you wanted to know where we're going. And now, you get to find out. The darkness in the back seat reached forward, wrapped around me, pulled me backward, through my seat, through the barrier between driver and passenger, through the space that should be solid but felt like water, like air, like nothing at all. And I was in the back seat, sitting where the silent passenger had been sitting, but the passenger wasn't there anymore. They were in the driver's seat, wearing my jacket, wearing my face, wearing my identity, and they were driving, taking my taxi, taking my route, taking my life. I tried to speak, tried to scream, tried to tell them to stop, but no sound came out. My voice was gone. My ability to speak was taken. I was the silent passenger now. I was the thing in the back seat. I was the one being transported, and I finally understood what that meant. Silent passengers aren't ghosts, aren't demons, aren't supernatural entities. They're taxi drivers, drivers who broke Rule 6, drivers who spoke to silent passengers, drivers who became what they acknowledged. We're all former drivers, all people who used to sit in the front seat, who used to control the route, who used to have names and lives and families. But we spoke, we broke the silence, and now we ride forever, always in the back seat, always being transported, always looking for the next driver who will make the same mistake, who will speak to us, who will take our place. Because that's how it works. That's how the cycle continues. When a taxi driver speaks to a silent passenger, they swap. The passenger becomes the driver becomes the passenger, and the new driver takes over the taxi, takes over the life, takes over the identity, while the new passenger sits in the back, silent, frozen, unable to speak, unable to escape, unable to do anything except wait for the next driver who breaks the rules. The thing wearing my face drove my taxi through Chicago, stopped at lights, followed traffic laws, picked up fares, normal fares, people who needed rides home, people who chatted about their days, people who tipped and said thank you and got out and went on with their lives, and none of them noticed, none of them saw that their driver wasn't really me, that something else was operating my body, using my voice, living my life. I sat in the back seat, silent, watching, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to warn anyone, just existing as a presence, as a weight, as a passenger being transported through a city I used to through a life I used to live, through an existence that was mine, but isn't anymore. Hours passed, maybe days. Time doesn't work the same when you're a silent passenger, when you're trapped in the liminal space between origin and destination, when you're part of the journey instead of facilitating it. And then I felt it, the familiar feeling, the temperature drop, the heavy air, the sense that something was wrong. A new fare had gotten in. A person, a real person, sitting next to me in the backseat, a young woman, maybe 25. She gave an address, spoke to the driver, my driver, the thing wearing my face, and it drove, following her directions, taking her where she wanted to go. But then she noticed me, looked at me sitting next to her in the darkness, and she spoke to me, made the same mistake I'd made, broke Rule 6 without knowing it existed. Are you okay? You look cold. And I felt it, the rules changing, the cycle resetting, the swap preparing to happen. She'd spoken to a silent passenger. She'd acknowledged me, and now she would take my place, would become the new silent passenger, would sit in the back of this taxi forever, while I would. What? Would I become the driver? Would I take over her body? Would I escape this nightmare by passing it on to someone else? But I couldn't do it. Couldn't let her suffer what I was suffering. Couldn't condemn her to this existence. So I did something I didn't know I could do. Something no silent passenger had done before. I fought the rules. I resisted the swap. I forced myself to speak. Forced sound through a throat that shouldn't be able to make sound. Forced words through lips that had been frozen for hours or days or years. Run. One word. Just one word. But it was enough. The woman's eyes went wide. She understood. She felt the danger. She felt the wrongness. And she ran, threw open the door, and ran into the Chicago night. Escaped, got away, broke the cycle before it could claim her. And the thing wearing my face turned to look at me, and I saw my own face twisted in rage, in frustration, in hunger that had been denied its meal, and it spoke with my voice, but the words weren't mine. You broke the cycle. You warned her. You let her escape. That's not allowed. That's not how this works. Silent passengers don't speak. Silent passengers don't help. Silent passengers don't resist. You violated something deeper than Rule 6. You violated the fundamental law of the journey, and now you face something worse than being a passenger. Now you face something worse than silence. The taxi stopped, not parked, just stopped, in the middle of a street I didn't recognize, in a Chicago that looked familiar but felt impossible. And the thing wearing my face got out, walked away, left me alone in the backseat of my own taxi, alone in the silence, alone in the liminal space, alone with whatever punishment comes for passengers who break the rules. I'm still here, still sitting in the backseat, still unable to leave, but I'm not transported anymore. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just here, frozen, existing in this taxi that sits on a street that might be Chicago or might be somewhere else, and I can feel others joining me, other passengers, other silent ones, other drivers who spoke when they shouldn't have, other people who broke Rule 6 and paid the price. We're all here now, all of us, 17 former drivers, all sitting in the backs of our own taxis, all trapped in the liminal space, all existing between origin and destination, all silent, all frozen, all waiting, and the city continues around us. Chicago keeps moving, taxis keep driving, passengers keep getting in and out, and nobody notices. Nobody sees the taxi sitting empty in streets that exist sideways to reality. Nobody sees the drivers trapped in their own back seats. Nobody knows about Rule 6 until it's too late. If you're a taxi driver, if you work night shift, if you've been given the rules, follow them, especially Rule 6, because the silent passengers are real. They're waiting. They're getting in your taxi. And if you speak to them, if you break their silence, if you acknowledge their presence, you'll join us. You'll become what they are. You'll spend eternity in the backseat of your own taxi, silent, frozen, unable to escape, unable to warn anyone, unable to do anything except exist as a warning that nobody heeds. I'm writing this somehow. Don't ask me how. Don't ask me why I can write, but can't speak. Don't ask me how these words are leaving this impossible place. Just know that they are. Just know that this is real. Just know that Rule 6 exists for a reason, and that reason is sitting in the backseat of a taxi on a Chicago street that you'll never find, waiting, silent, frozen, forever. If a passenger gets in your taxi and says nothing, do not speak to them. Wait, listen, follow their gestures. Let them complete their journey in silence, and maybe, just maybe, you'll go home at the end of your shift. You'll see your family, You'll live your life. You'll avoid becoming what I became, what 17 of us became, what countless others have become over the decades since taxis started rolling through city streets. The silent passengers are everywhere, in every city, in every taxi, in every backseat, waiting, and they're all former drivers, all people who spoke when they should have stayed quiet, all warnings that nobody listens to, all mistakes that keep getting repeated, and the cycle continues. Driver becomes passenger, passenger becomes driver, and the taxis keep rolling through streets that exist sideways to reality, through cities that look familiar but feel impossible, through journeys that never end, and destinations that never arrive. I can see my reflection in the window, see my own face staring back at me, and my mouth is open, like I'm trying to speak, like I'm trying to warn someone, but no sound comes out. No words form, just silence, eternal silence. The silence I should have respected, the silence I should have kept, the silence that would have saved me if I'd only followed Rule 6. Don't speak to the silent passengers. Don't break their silence. Don't make my mistake. Just drive. Just wait. Just follow the rules. And maybe you'll avoid ending up like me, like us, like all the taxi drivers who learned too late why Rule 6 exists. Still here, still silent, still waiting, still trapped in the back seat, in the liminal space, in the journey that never ends, forever.